Good morning. Welcome. Bienvenue. As John mentioned, my name is Stephen Green, and I'm the head of the Political, Economic, and Public Diplomacy team at the Consulate General of Canada here in Denver. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Art, Grand Narratives, and Lived Histories, a conversation with Kent Monkman. The Consulate General, in addition to our work on advocacy, business development, and providing consular services to Canadians across the U.S. Mountain West region, also work with arts and culture organizations throughout the region to support the inclusion of works by artists from across Canada. We have placed particular emphasis on working with partners to highlight Indigenous voices and stories from Canada in local exhibitions and festivals, including at the Indigenous Film and Arts Festival, the Denver Film Festival, Cinema Q, Series Fest, and Levitt Pavilion, among others. We are also grateful for our ongoing partnership with the Denver Art Museum. It has been a pleasure to be involved in supporting, in a small way, the intentional and thoughtful programming of this institution that helped make the Art Museum a truly special place. Denver is well served by its world-class collection of Indigenous arts of North America and the important collaboration between the museum and Indigenous peoples of the region. As I turn the floor back to John to introduce our distinguished guest and lead off the discussion, I wanted to conclude by encouraging all of you, following today's talk, to visit the exhibition, Kent Monkman, History is Painted by the Victors, which is presented in partnership with the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. I know that the Art Museum here, the team here in Denver, has been working for years on bringing this exhibition together, and that Mr. Monkman's work that have been compiled for this show will be the catalyst for many important and meaningful, and yes, some difficult, conversations. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you here today.
I think I might move this. I'm not wired, so I'm just going to move it out of the way. And with that, I'd like to welcome Kent Monkman. Is this working? All right. Ooh, they're getting smart water. This is fancy for us up here now today.
Plastic water bottles are bad.
Yeah. Bad us. So what do you want to talk about now? This is truly an honor to have the opportunity to sit and visit and have a conversation with Kent Monkman and share with you all. We didn't really want to repeat what the exhibition is doing because you're going to have an opportunity to get in there and see it. So we thought we would kind of talk around the subjects to give you a little bit of insight into Kent's process, his thought process, as well as finer details about the exhibition and his motivations for doing the work. So I'm going to start off by talking about the subtitle. So Kent Monkman, History is Painted by the Victors. This title cuts to the point of the exhibition. That is, that power dynamics are at play in the visual authoring of the histories we think we know. It also draws attention to the unearned and unquestioned privilege of non-native artists who helped to create the myths of the past, which then helped to shape popular consciousness about and of Indigenous people. So let's begin by exploring the power of visual authorship. What do you see? What did you see in the work of 19th century artists that inspired you to both challenge their work and painting these missing narratives?
Just jumping right in with an easy question,
oh, yeah.
John? Well, a little backstory. So I graduated from college, and I thought that abstract painting was the highest form of art making. I was kind of following the abstract expressionists, and I spent about 12 years trying to find a very unique way of making a mark with paint, which I succeeded in doing, and I was very proud of that journey. But at the end of that, I also realized that I had created such a personal language that the themes and the subjects that I was interested in communicating that I felt were urgent, that had to do with colonization and colonized sexuality, were just not being understood by the people looking at the paintings. So when I started to really examine my own work and think about what I was trying to paint, it really took me back to the subject of land as the site of conflict. And then with that little thread towards land, it really brought me to the landscape painting genre of the 19th century artists like Albert Bierstadt and Hudson River School. And that's when I discovered the work of George Catlin and Paul Kane and John Mix Stanley. And that led me to just to realize that the whole story of this continent, it was really the authoritative story of this continent, still upheld in our museums as the official story, was really told from a very subjective point of view. It was told from the settler point of view. And it was a story of erasure. It was a story of removing Indigenous people from our own lands, or considering us as a vanishing race, or somehow bit players in tiny little bit players in these grand landscapes that were functioning to basically sell the American West as an empty place. So I just did a 180 from abstraction, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna pick up this genre of painting, which is actually really interesting, and these are beautiful paintings. These Albert Bierstadt paintings to me really resonated because all the ideology, the Christian ideology, was there in these paintings. You can look at the clouds and you can see the light shining out of the clouds, and you just know that this was manifest destiny, and this was the ideology of the settlers was there in these paintings. And so I set about on this course to start making representational paintings in the style of these painters, and I decided to let go of my personal mark, which I now refer to as my wiggle, and I decided to disappear my hand into the work of these artists, and that was a kind of a maturing, I thought, for me as an artist, to also just realize that my voice and my vision would still be very present, and that was like such a major turning point. And then I started to play with inserting Indigenous narratives into these paintings, and that led, of course, to the creation of an important character in my work.
And who might this be?
Good segue, John.
No, yeah.
Thank you. So I created Mischief, Eagle Testicle, with this play on the word mischief, of course, and egotistical. And the idea there was, I got inspired by the work of George Catlin and John Mix Stanley because, I found images that they were making where they were painting themselves into their own work at the same time that they were making images of Indigenous people. So I wanted to create a character that could reverse that gaze, that could live inside my work and sort of, be a bit of a time traveler, and upend the subjectivity of their work and just kind of tell the stories embedded in these landscapes from an Indigenous perspective, from our point of view. And I was also thinking, I wanted to carry over those themes that I was already working in with this abstract language, which had to do with colonized sexuality. And I wanted people to understand that Indigenous cultures and societies, we had a place for two-spirit people, gender-fluid people. We had a place for people who were queer or bisexual. It didn't matter. We don't even have a word in my language for a gay person. It doesn't matter. And so Mischief was born out of this desire to create a very empowered understanding of sexuality and gender identity that was here all throughout North America before the settlers brought their very limited understanding of gender and sexuality and imposed it on us through the church and their policies of erasure and genocide.
A lot to unpack there. Actually, as you were talking, I was like, okay, my next question is going to be this, but then you went in a different direction. So where do we even begin? The landscapes, for example, like the Albert Bierstadt works. We had talked before about how in order for your work to be in dialogue with them, you felt like you needed to paint at the level of these artists, of these 19th century artists, of the old masters, in order to create a visual that stands shoulder to shoulder. So much so that my oldest daughter was on a school field trip to Washington, D.C. and went to the National Gallery of Art. And they have a painting there by Albert Bierstadt titled Mount Corcoran. One of the first painting you'll see when you go in the exhibition is a reappropriated landscape of Mount Corcoran by Bierstadt. And my daughter texted me from the National Gallery, said, "Dad, did this artist copy Kent Monkman's work?" So clearly, you achieve the function of, painting at the level. But, there's also this element of kind of seduction through the familiar and then twisting the narrative as you get closer. So with these grand landscapes, across the room, you see them. They're beautiful. I mean, they're exquisite. And as you get closer, you see there's a peopling. The people that there are present, in many ways, are getting us to kind of rethink about the way that we look at land, about place, about who truly is there. I don't even know where to go with that particular question, but can you start off by talking about kind of your practice and your desire to continually push yourself to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with these greats of the past?
So one of the first thoughts I had when I discovered this work, because maybe I was a little bit lazy on that day, but I thought, I'll just Photoshop these and I'll, insert that. And then I thought, what a cop-out, I'm a painter and I'm going to learn and expand my own vocabulary of painting and really return to representational work that I had learned in college, because I was quite good at drawing and painting in my whole life. And so I set about to really start emulating great painters of the past. And that set me on a journey to start looking at old master paintings again. I've been going to museums over the past 4 decades. I mean, I love art history, and I realized that all the old masters were looking and copying each other, and that's how you learn. That's how you learn to be a better painter, is you learn from your predecessors. And so I just wanted to have a vast vocabulary of painting. But I knew that the message in my work, which was very much about authorizing our experiences into art history, had to be achieved with a technique that is as good, if not better, than the original, so that the importance of that message will be understood and upheld and respected. So that's when I really just thought, okay, I've got to really get good at these paintings, and that's when I really was just thinking about disappearing my hand and just really trying to, improve my technique. And that, over the last couple of decades, the methodology in my studio really started to evolve so that we could employ, old master techniques, but, updating it with like new technologies, digital photography, and so forth. We can talk more about that anytime you're ready.
We will get to that. God, you keep setting up all my questions. So besides a brush and a hand, another tool that you often have used in your work is camp and humor. They've long since been tools that you've employed in strategically, addressing different kind of themes in your work. How did this begin, and how has the use of humor developed for you over the years?
Well, we all like a good joke, right? So humor is an important part of just being a human being, and I think it's embedded in increased storytelling. We have so many stories that are funny and sexual and ridiculous, and I think in creating Mischief, there was humor in that right off the top. I created her first outfit was riffing on Cher's Half-Breed, so there was there's just humor embedded in the character from the get-go, and I was thinking just about, Wasagachuk, our trickster character in Cree cosmology, and so the humor was an important part of it's been an important part of my life, but it's just I wanted it to come through in the work as a device to seduce people into the work. When you laugh, your heart is open and you're ready to receive, a different message. So humor kind of disarms people, and I wanted to kind of use it as a strategy just to bring people into the work, and then also balance some of the subject matter, which if you start looking at the colonial project, a lot of it gets pretty ugly pretty quickly. And so I knew that if I was going to be dealing with truth, that means looking at some difficult subjects, and that means finding a way as an artist to balance how I bring that subject to my audience. And so those strategies of seduction and humor are a way to also reach a wide audience and to bring an audience to an understanding of the truth of this continent that has been that governments have tried to erase, education systems have ignored, and so over the years I've been cycling through different chapters and different stories through our experiences to authorize them into art history. And I've always loved museums, and I work a lot with museum collections, and I look for ways to engage with permanent collections. The stories that museums tell about themselves and about the continent here are still needing intervention, and it all depends on which museum you're in. I mean, there's still a lot of room for improvement.
So as visitors get a chance to go through the exhibition, it starts off introducing Mischief and how Kent is addressing art history through this narrative function. And then we get into another section that kind of celebrates kind of queer identities, queer bodies in a very positive way. Then it gets, in many ways, very heavy. There's a moment where the humor drops away and you just get very real. Can you talk about that transition from, trying to soften these difficult subjects to a much more direct approach?
So that came, that body of work, that series that really, where I realized I needed to kind of approach some of these dark chapters that first of all had to do with the removal of children to boarding schools. It came through that process of realizing that I needed to absent Mischief from that so that she wouldn't distract from the power of that story. And in writing Mischief's memoir, which is available here in the bookstore, please get a copy. It was a project that I did with my co-writer, Giselle Gordon. It took us 6 years to write that story, and the outline for that memoir were all my paintings that I'd made up until that time. And that grew out of a project where Giselle and I were writing the didactic panels for an exhibition that I did in Canada in 2017. And I was commissioned to create a body of work, an exhibition, in a response to Canada celebrating being 150 years. And what I wanted to do was basically ask Canadians to think about what the last 150 years had meant for Canadians as they celebrated their country. And one of those chapters was on residential schools. I couldn't ignore that, and that became an important part of the project. So when Giselle and I were sort of pondering the label for the room that the Scream was in, we decided that she wasn't, even though she was there as a witness and as the author of the didactic text for each room, we decided just that she wasn't going to even speak to it. She just kind of went silent. And so, but through that project of creating the memoir, we also understood the character more deeply, and we she she's a shapeshifter, so she was able to be there even though the scene she's absent from that scene. We suggest that maybe she's there in the form of a bird, and she's witnessing this happening. So even though she might not be present, she might be present in some other form. So it was a way to understand her purpose in writing this memoir. We realized we had to really kind of think, because I created Mischief. She kind of exploded onto a canvas artisan model, which is in this exhibition. And over time, the depth came to the character. The memoir gave us an opportunity to write her creation story and to really understand her purpose. And her purpose that we realized in writing this, and we also had to understand limitations to her power too, because if she was all powerful, why wouldn't she intervene and stop certain things from happening? So her purpose really was to be a witness, to bear witness to these events and to be able to communicate them. So that voice that comes through in the memoir is really impactful because she's there and she's present while these different things are happening to people that she knows and loves.
Your paintings have layer upon layer of meaning. Art historical references, indigenous knowledge about plants, animals, the stars, to name a few. These references both provide entry points for understanding for some, while holding back deeper meanings of knowledge that is not intended for all to know. How do you balance providing enough information while not revealing too much?
So over the years, I've collaborated with different Cree knowledge keepers, Cree language speakers, and sometimes they tell me, well, it's not for me to tell you about this. So I respect the fact that certain knowledge is not to be communicated. But also, I'm on my own learning journey about my own culture. My grandmother was one of those children in residential school, and so that impact, that loss of language that was intended by government was successful in that the language didn't get passed down. So I'm on my own learning journey. But I work with knowledge keepers who are very generous, and so I want to share as much as they allow me to share, and they encourage me to share about Cree ways of knowing, and I like to spotlight just that constellation of knowledge that lives in our culture that I draw from. There's so much deep knowledge embedded in the language itself. And so those collaborations are just really important to me.
That's really great. And through these relationships, is this one of there's a few portraits in the exhibition of knowledge keepers, of community leaders, of activists, of indigenous educators. Did the working with these individuals kind of inspire you to really kind of draw attention to their place in society?
Yeah, so there's just so many amazing people in my community, and I started this portrait series. It actually was a way of responding to that question of what do we do with all of these colonial monuments, and there was debate about that kind of during the pandemic in Canada. And
here too.
Yes, here as well. And indigenous people had toppled some important monuments, and so there was a kind of violence happening and retribution going both ways, and anger, and a very wise Indigenous elder, the late Senator Murray Sinclair, entered into that debate and said, let's not attract more hate from our settler neighbors. Let's build monuments to our own people. So I was, I lived near a town where the townspeople were wanting to, they had just erected a bronze sculpture of our first Prime Minister, Johnny MacDonald, who was responsible for many of those genocidal policies. And so there was debate around that statue. And so I said, well, I'm just going to start making portraits of incredible people in my community, young people, elders, teachers, academics, artists, and it really grew from there. And the idea with those portraits is that they will live in the public trust. So, since making them now, they're starting to enter public collections. And what's really kind of amazing about that now is that each one of those collections or institutions that's getting those portraits is now programming work around those individuals. So that's really been a kind of an amazing evolution. I didn't think that wasn't what I was thinking would happen when I made them, but it's just really amazing to see that people are recognizing how important these people are.
Yeah, no, opening those doors and creating new opportunities is incredible. As tomorrow is Easter, let's talk about Easter eggs in your work. You like that? Yeah, that was pretty good.
Good segue.
I actually forgot to tell my favorite joke earlier because when I was introducing Kent, I usually introduce him as Canada's second most famous artist after Celine Dion. I promised him the other night I would stop saying that joke because I've used it a lot, but it's just so good. But okay, so Easter eggs, yep. So as someone who has spent a lot of time with, for those of you who don't know, Kent first, we developed a relationship with the Denver Art Museum and Monkman Studio in 2012 when Kent came here to be keynote speaker at a small symposium that we had. And then through the help of like Vicki and Kent Logan, local collectors and supporters, we were able to start acquiring some of Kent's work, into their collection, which they've now donated to the Denver Art Museum. In 2013, he did an original performance here at the Denver Art Museum. So this is a long history of working together. So I've been around Kent's work a lot. I've been to his studio. I've spent time with it. Yet I constantly keep discovering new things that I hadn't seen before. And the discoveries of these new things never cease to amaze me. There are elements tucked away in a corner or oftentimes hidden in plain sight. I mean, there's one painting in there that I've seen a million times and did not realize, I'm not going to tell you what it is, but there is something hidden that's literally 3 feet tall, and I didn't see it until the other day. It's mind-boggling. So museums often try to encourage close looking, but your work really demands it and rewards those who my mic keeps cutting off, sorry. It rewards those who actually spend the time to slowly go through the painting and not just take in the overall work, but really to look deep. This brings surprise and delight to the experience of your painting. And I will emphasize that word experience. You're not just seeing Kent's work, and if you haven't been in yet, you'll understand immediately when you get in the exhibition. You are experience his work. Can you share a little bit about your motivations to include these Easter eggs? What are you hoping visitors get out of this? Or do you have a particular intention in the inclusion?
Well, I'm a huge fan of history painting, and those great monumental paintings for me have a lot in them. And there are layers and layers of meaning embedded in those works, whether it's historical references or political references. And so over the years, as my paintings got bigger, my team and I would sort of brainstorm about how we could just add more and enrich in the paintings more, add layers. Some might only be read by art historians. We put things in there for people who love, tattoos. We put things for people in there who love jewelry. We're always finding ways to kind of code the painting and add layers. But it's also just for, I make the kind of paintings that I love to look at. So I'm always wanting to make a painting that's like a rich experience that I want to spend time looking at over and over and over again. And so I think that's the kind of experience that I want people to have is slow down, spend some time with one of the works and don't rush through it. And that was something that I was affirmed for me when in one of my first sort of touring exhibitions in Canada. It was, I think, 2007, and I had a couple of those huge paintings. One that's here, The Triumph of Mischief, and I was just in the museum taking pictures, install pictures or whatever, and this elderly couple came in and sat on one of the benches, and they spent about half an hour with just one of those paintings, talking, pointing, looking, and then they moved to another bench and spent another half an hour with another painting. And that was such a high compliment to me that I had achieved that sort of, way of making a painting that people would want to live with, that they would want to spend time looking at.
Yeah, when we were installing the exhibition, our install crew, with just one painting, we're having competitions to see who could find the most amount of rats in the painting. And I actually won. And not because I'd spent time with it, but it really was. It was like, there are things hidden. They're tucked away in little corners.
Should we set the challenge? Try and find the most number of rats and try and count the penises.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to say that?
You're highly unlikely to probably get the right number of penises because there's a lot. There are a lot. Which actually kind of, you touched on something earlier about kind of decolonizing sexuality and, kind of presenting, everything is presented in this exhibition as normal. There is nothing in the exhibition that inherently is sexual or anything. It's really the lenses in which we're looking through that impact the way that we see the work. And so one of the things that I ask of all of you when you go through the exhibition is when you feel anything from the exhibition, whether it's sadness, whether it's humor, whether it is embarrassment, whether you're shocked or appalled by something, what lens are you looking through that gets you to feel that way? Is it something that, through your life experience, through your education, your religion, your family beliefs, whatever that may be? Are they lenses that you put there, or are they lenses that unknown to you did someone else put there, and that is causing you to react in a particular way? Because that's true. Again, when we're talking about the human body, I'm going to totally tell on myself here. So, what story's coming. So back in October, I was in Korea for an exhibition of indigenous art from our collection that we were touring 2 venues in Korea. And my hotel caught on fire. It's like, seriously, it was like literally I walked into the lobby and there's like smoke everywhere and I had to walk through 3 inches of water from the hoses. It was crazy. And I had to be out of the hotel for a while. I go and eat lunch, and I'm sitting there thinking, what am I going to do with my time? And everyone kept saying, oh, you got to go to a Korean spa. And I was like, I am not going to a Korean spa. I've never been to a Korean spa. There's at least the wet part of it is what they call it. There's no clothes. And I'm like, I am not doing that. And then I'm sitting there and I was like, I'm a hypocrite. I'm up here constantly talking about how the human body is normal. There's nothing inherently sexual about it. But I have those lenses. I have those interpretive, goggles on. And I was like, damn it, I'm going to do this. And I did, and it was no big deal. Everyone who was in there was like, there were high school kids who were best friends who were just hanging out like that. There were, grandparents and their grandchildren. It was no big deal. And I was like, oh my God, I had put all of this, fear about it, but it was Kent's work that caused me to kind of question why I felt a particular way and gave me the courage to actually push through and do it. And now I highly recommend it, honestly.
So when people ask me, what do I want people to take away from this exhibition? Take your clothes off.
Yeah. That's
I'm glad I inspired you to get into your birthday suit.
Yeah, I was going to say, we should, there are museums that have done nude tours of exhibitions before. I am not doing that. I am not doing it.
Well, that actually, so when I was researching George Catlin, and there was one representation in his body of work of that two-spirit, gender-fluid person Dance to the Berdache is the painting that he made, and it was a scene depicting that two-spirit person being honored by the men that they had had sexual relationships with. And I became obsessed with that painting and made a few works in response to that painting, because it was that one painting that I could find in his body of work that showed a two-spirit person. But in his journal, I found his own writing about it. And so talk about that lens of moral bias and fear. He said, this is one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen, and I wish for it to disappear before it can be more fully recorded. So that gave me even more inspiration to make my work and to get past that very limited understanding.
It was probably that mischief turned him down at the time. So this is an awful segue when we're talking about penises and nudity to then go to talk about monumental size. It's literally the next question. So I would be remiss not to address the 12-foot by 24-foot elephant in the room, and no, I'm not talking about Miss Chief's member. The works in this exhibition play with scale, ranging from small and intimate to monumental and grand. Has your approach to scale changed over your career, and how do you choose the scale to tell the stories you intend to share?
Well, I think at first, when I first encountered those very large Bierstadt paintings, I was in awe of them, right? I was like, oh, these are incredible. There's something. And, when they were originally painted and shown, this is, pre-cinema, and they were actually hung, in galleries that people could experience them as though they were watching a movie or something, or going to the theater. So I loved that idea of the grandeur, the scale of them, and I wanted to emulate that. And then as my work evolved, and I actually really was inspired to make history paintings, the authority of the history painting, so much of that comes through the scale. And, I've been working with that landscape genre for a number of years, a good 10 years already, and then I was at the Prado looking at these Spanish history paintings, and I stood in front of this one monumental painting, which was about the execution of these men who, during the Spanish Revolution, and it just kind of stopped me in my tracks. It just had such power. The composition was kind of restrained. There was emotion in the men's faces. They were facing this firing squad, and it just kind of really motivated me to move more in that direction. I thought, if I can take that scale and I can take that skill and authorize indigenous experience into art history with this authority of these large paintings, that will really honor our experiences and our truth and bring them forward with that same authority. I was really struck by the fact this artist had made this painting like 150 years ago, and that's what I really thought that I wanted to do with my work, was make paintings that would transcend time. 150 years from now, people will look at them and say, that happened. And so that's really, I think, the scale evolved over time. But process-wise, you don't just go from a small painting to large painting without sort of figuring out how you're going to get there. And another inspiration was being in the Louvre and looking at Rubens' cycle on Marie de Medici. 24 massive paintings. And I looked at the dates of those, it only took 4 years to make these paintings. And so that sort of really charged me to kind of figure out in my studio, with my studio assistants, how can we make paintings at that scale and how can we make more of them. And so we figured it out. And we kind of went back to the drawing board, really relied on my drawings as this roadmap forward, create the compositions as drawings, and then we do color studies. But before we even do the color studies, we started employing models, bringing models in. That painting there, Mischief's Wet Dream, was kind of a transitional painting because it was so big. We went from a little color study that I did that was maybe a couple, 2 feet wide, to that, and it was this abrupt shift in scale. And we kind of backtracked on that. We're like, whoa, like my painters needed more source material, better source material other than my own color study. So that's when we started to work with models, and a lot of the models in that painting were my own team, studio assistants. And we, went to the costume shop and got clothing for them, and started to use digital photography and figured out how I wanted to light them, and that really changed the methodology in the studio so we could get to that scale, because we needed the right tools. So, for many years I resisted photography because I thought it was cheating. I thought painters don't use photographs. But then one of my heroes, Delacroix, I realized that he was looking at all these photos of male nudes. So I thought, well, I can do that too.
That's why you were looking at photos of male nudes? Okay. And I will also note that this painting, that you see on here, this is about half the size of the actual painting. So when you get up there, you'll just see, it's quite impressive. So you started getting into talking about the kind of transition to using models, and you've mentioned kind of the atelier model or studio practice. In the exhibition, we don't really address the way these works are made in the exhibition text, but a video was created in collaboration between the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, Denver Art Museum, and Monkman Studio to pull back that curtain. And in a very open and unprecedented way, Kent was generous with allowing us to really show how these works are made. Because as you said, with the paintings you saw at the Louvre, was it Rubens? There's no way that Rubens painted all of those all by himself. It required a studio. It needed an atelier. And none of those artists did it themselves. And so there's also this really interesting connection of having this Western model of art making, the atelier model, but then also thinking about indigenous forms of art making and how it's a collaborative process. If there's a young child they want to bring out into the dance circle for the first time, it's not just one person who makes the clothes for them. It's the family that comes together. Each person does their part. If they're good at this, they work on that. If they're good at that, they work on that. And everyone chips in to make something bring to reality. And that's such a cornerstone. Carved poles in the Pacific Northwest, there's not a single artist who makes those. They have a master and apprentices. They have their family that help them. So I'm particularly taken by, or I don't like the critique that some people may have of artists who are who are not necessarily doing everything themselves, because truly it's a very more recent Western perspective that art making, as I think you often say, is this, the tortured artist soul, or you want to elaborate on that a little?
Well, I didn't want to be a tortured artist with syphilis.
Okay, you might need to unpack that for someone, because you just threw that out of nowhere, and yeah.
Well, so the idea of the modern artist really came from, the advent of Impressionism, and that singular vision of an artist doing everything for themselves, and there is a place for that, obviously, but that was moving away from the academy and these ateliers that where artists would work with assistants. And I did that for many years on my own, and I learned a lot from just moving paint around on my own. But it was lonely. I also just wanted to collaborate with other artists, and that desire to collaborate first took form. I kind of moved into theater and was doing set design, and then I was making films, and but then I started to build a team to help me, just out of pure necessity, to help with my administration, to go to the art store to help me stretch canvases, because an artist's career will only sort of advance as fast as you can make the work and create the work. And And but then I also realized it's actually harder it's more challenging to work with a team because you have to teach people how to make the work that you want to make. And so it really became about communication. And I realized that, again, moving from that abstract body of work into representational work, I wanted to communicate with people. I wanted these ideas, these experiences that were important to me to go out as widely as possible, and I wanted a language, a visual vocabulary to reach a wide audience. And that meant that in order to create these large-scale paintings, I wanted to employ a team to help me make them, and that meant that I needed to learn how to teach and to disseminate and to teach them how to make these paintings with me. So that, in fact, is much harder. And then I also have now, when I went to art school, I never imagined that I would have a team. We have about 17 now, and there comes the challenges of just kind of running a small business too. Like I have amazing people working with me, and I have good employee retention because I also believe in making sure that they're paid well, and so there's a whole challenge of just kind of running a business as well. And those are things that you don't really think about when you're young and you're thinking about just getting your vision out there. But over time, I kind of figured that out, and with a lot of expertise, I have people helping me.
Excellent. In the exhibition, there's a series of works from your Urban Res series. This is kind of it's a great opportunity to address a lived experience of probably today the majority of Indigenous people who have grown up now in urban centers. And there are 105,000 Indigenous people in the local metro area here around Denver. In the 1950s, Denver was a federal relocation center where the government was relocating Native people here under the guise of economic opportunity. You could probably say that they were trying to, not live up to their own responsibilities that were encoded in treaties for taking care of the people for the land theft that occurred. And you can unpack that in multiple ways. But through the exhibition, in this one particular section, there are depictions of urban scenes of, Indigenous gangs, graffiti, tattooing, but also looking at very contemporary issues related to kind of the mass institutionalization of Indigenous people, such as incarceration at disproportionate rates, the foster care system, the way that women's bodies are treated. Can you talk a little bit about your motivation for shining a light on these experiences of urban Native people?
So that really grew out of the realization that European modernity, transplanted here in North America, had very effectively, created this ideology of erasure and amnesia. So essentially, renaming places, after European places or European explorers. Most of our cities were gathering places for First People, including the city that I grew up in, Winnipeg. And, in that city of Winnipeg, First Nations people are treated like second-class citizens. And this idea that, European erasure had been so effective to kind of, erase us. And so those values of erasure was really what I wanted to speak about, and they were modern ideals. And so that idea of Indigenous people living in our urban centers, more of us live in urban centers than live on reserves, and I wanted to remind people that these cities that we all live in it's all Indigenous land. And so with that strong Indigenous presence in my hometown, with the economic disparity, the institutional impact from these colonial projects, I just wanted to have this very strong presence of our ways still being present in the cities, and I was looking at Picasso and the Cubists and looking at the violence in which female nudes had been painted, and using that juxtaposition to talk about that violence against Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people. And it's a really kind of jarring, juxtaposition when you see that kind of figuration in sort of smacked into these paintings. But I love that series, and I kind of want to return to that series because, again, I love art history and all the different parts of it. And I like working in different series as well. So, I have the Rendezvous series, I have the Madhouse series, I have the Urban Res series, and we have a new series coming out, the Knowledge Keeper series, and it's just like I like to kind of move between these different series, and some of them are more hard-hitting than others, and so one series is more lighthearted, might give us an opportunity to kind of work on subject matter that's not so heavy. So, yeah.
Earlier, we mentioned the performance that happened here in 2013 that was at the time titled "Casualties of Modernity," which was you've later retitled "Mischief of Hearts." But from you like that, yeah. So from this performance, you then kind of refined it in many ways and filmed an art film, which is like a telenovela soap opera, like a 15-minute long Casualties of Modernity, where Mischief plays the role of kind of like Princess Diana when she gets a tour of a hospital, but she's going around and diagnosing what's wrong with different phases of modern art. So I guess the question is, you want to either unpack kind of like, how you're, like what you see that these forms of modern art don't give us, but also kind of like why history painting, referencing neoclassical and neo-romanticism, why is that today the genre that you choose to use?
Well, it was interesting because when Christophe was talking about how I sort of picked up this genre of painting that had been kind of discarded and thrown into the dustbin, when the Impressionists came along, and that possibility for painting to hold narratives, was happening as it was being discarded by Europeans. That was around the time of the signing of the treaties, and probably some of the worst dispossession of Indigenous people from our lands. And so I thought, oh, how interesting, just as they're decimating us, they've now poo-pooed this possibility to tell narratives in paintings. And so it really, I really realized the possibility of that genre to bring Indigenous narratives into this canon of art history, despite the fact that it's 150 years passé. But I just find so much possibility in that language of painting, and we haven't done that with filmmaking, and we haven't done that with symphonic music or opera. You can still have this grand sweeping narratives possible in music, and why can't we have that possible in visual art? So and then the way I think about the way that I work, it's really about kind of conducting a symphony. I'm directing my team, and coming up with the ideas, and much the way a film director directs a film.
We would never presume to tell people how to feel in this exhibition, but my personal experience is a roller coaster of emotions. There are moments when you laugh, when you cry, when I laugh, when I cry. But as people kind of come through the exhibition, we talked about humor as a way of diffusing things, but humor is also one of the best forms of medicine, one of the best forms of healing. As people are leaving this exhibition, what do you want them to walk out into the world thinking about or feeling or have taken from this experience?
Well, as you remove your clothing, no.
We have lockers on the first floor, and I don't know where you're going to pin it to, but
what was really kind of amazing about this experience is that I was not involved in any of the curation, and I really trusted John to tell that story about my work. So John really set up this these rhythms and this arc through my work. And, myself being so close to it, I don't know if I would have done the same exhibition, but I really appreciate it because John found this beautiful way of introducing my work, introducing Mischief, and then kind of taking you on this journey. But when I think about my work, I think I became this kind of reluctant educator, and I didn't really, again, being an artist many years ago, it wasn't until I had that frustration of not being able to communicate that I realized that I wanted to communicate, and what I wanted to communicate, most people don't know anything about. The governments of both countries were so effective at this erasure of removing Indigenous truths from your education system. Most of you have graduated from public schools and universities not learning anything about Indigenous truth. And so I realized that on 2 tours of my work in Canada that I kind of took on this responsibility to have those conversations with an audience who was largely ignorant of so many of our truths, and some of those were residential schools, or the fact that we are overrepresented up to 90% in some Canadian penitentiaries. And most Canadians don't think about it because they've all been given that free pass that modernity gave them to just live in our cities that have been very effective at erasing our presence. So I want people to take away this idea that we're still here, we've always been here, and also just to think, to learn about some of the incredible people. Again, it kind of ends with the portrait series and then the Great Mystery, but through the portrait series, it's also a way for me to spotlight these incredible knowledge keepers and the incredible people doing amazing things in our community. And I want people to know about them.
Well, we're at time, so please, thank you, Kent. Thank you.